With the year almost over, get ready for the most shocking animal attacks of 2024, exclusively here on Fierce. From terrifying encounters to brutal survival stories, these moments will leave you on the edge of your seat. Don't blink. You won't believe what happens next. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. Celebrating the start of new summer adventures, Lulu Gribbin decided to take her twin daughters on a mother-daughter trip, alongside a few of their friends and their moms. She thought it would be a great way to enjoy the warm weather, far away from their Alabama town, Mountain Brook. Excitement was floating around the girls, as this was their first ever beach trip. June 7th started like any other day. The crystal clear water and white sand of Seacrest Beach, Florida, would later become the scene of a terrible accident. The girls were eager to soak up the sun and enjoy the ocean, so they woke up early in the morning and made their way to the beach at around 10:30 a.m. They enjoyed the carefree summertime vibe by playing volleyball, swimming, and tanning. Later in the day, the group made the decision to investigate the first and second sandbars, which are well known for their deeper waters and abundant marine life. They borrowed a boogie board and a hot pink sparkle float to navigate the waters, finding sand dollars and marveling at the wildlife. However, as soon as they got to the second sandbar, the girls realized that something was off. The decision was clear. They needed to swim down once to touch the bottom and make sure everything was okay. After a few more minutes, the girls quickly paddled back to the shore, fear settling in. After some more tanning, Lulu's sister Ellie came with an idea for a memorable photo. Each of the girls must hold in her hand a sand dollar. The only problem was that Ellie didn't have one. So she begged everyone to get into the water one more time and help her find a sand dollar among the sandbars. While swimming through the tranquil waves of Seacrest Beach, the girls befriended another group who helped them find more sand dollars. Fun and adventure led to them losing count of the hours spent in the water. So after the group of friends they met there left, they decided to get out of the water as well. But as they swam calmly toward the shore, a predator was lurking in the waist-high water, ready to attack. A piercing shark echoed through the water. One of the girls, Adele, saw the shark's fin circling the group, getting closer and closer to its potential prey. Panicked, she screamed for help, alerting everyone in the water and on the beach of the shark's presence. Lulu's twin Ellie recalls that in that moment, she simply knew she had to swim. She didn't look back to see if her friends and sister were right behind her. As Ellie reached the shore and turned around to check on the other girls, her eyes filled with tears and panic. In front of her, the ocean waves were stained red with blood. Among them was Lulu, who was struggling to save herself. A bull shark, known for its aggressive nature, had its jaws tightly locked around Lulu. The sight was nothing short of a nightmare. The 15-year-old's screams alerted other beachgoers who fled the scene, scared for their lives. Lulu was now alone in the water with the bull shark, who didn't seem to want to let go of her. Despite her attempts to kick the beast off of her, pain flooded her entire body, paralyzing it. The shark clamped its jaws around Lulu's left hand and claimed it as its prize, then moved on to her right leg. Lulu's lungs were filling with water every time the shark tried to get her underwater, dragging her with so much power that she felt it was impossible to free herself. With one last ferocious bite, the bull shark mauled Lulu's right leg, leaving her with her thigh bone visible and barely any muscle left. Under the terrified eyes of her twin sister Ellie, the scene felt surreal, straight out of a horror movie. All she could do was watch as her sister was dragged around the bloody waves, feeling helpless. She screamed for help, saying over and over again, "That's my sister," until someone finally came to their aid. A desperate dash to save Lulu's life soon followed the initial shock of the attack. As soon as the shark left the area, beachgoers, including 2 doctors on vacation, moved to help the injured teenager. A couple of men jumped into the bloody water to get Lulu ashore. Despite her shock, Ellie was determined to help and dove into the water, holding Lulu's head in hand to prevent the waves from hitting her injured body. Gribbin, Lulu's mother, showed up on the scene not long after. A simple "Mom, it's Lulu" is all Ellie had to say to the mother of two before tears streamed down her face and she let out a piercing scream. The sight of her daughter lying motionless on the beach, pale and covered in blood, was her worst nightmare. The scene was terrifying. Volunteers and doctors were working tirelessly to stabilize Lulu, as Anne's screams of horror echoed across the beach. Lulu was quickly airlifted to Sacred Heart Hospital in Pensacola, approximately an hour and 20 minutes away. Throughout the trip, Anne and Ellie held on to one another and fervently prayed that Lulu would survive. The extent of Lulu's injuries was revealed when they arrived at the hospital. In order to avoid further complications, doctors had to amputate her right leg just above the knee. She had also lost her left hand. During the attack, Lulu also lost 2/3 of her blood supply, which put her in critical condition. Even though Lulu had severe injuries, she managed to survive and continues to improve every day. Her vitals improved enough the next day that the breathing tube was taken out, and she started breathing on her own. Her first words to her family were, "I made it." Aspiring to be a doctor, Lulu demanded to watch as the doctors took out her central line a few days later. Several surgeries were required to seal the amputations and treat Lulu's wounds before she could start her recovery. She maintained the same spirit through it all. Lulu is still making jokes, smiling through the pain, and trying to find the good in what has happened to her. As for the scene of the attack, the normally bustling beach was eerily quiet in the days that followed the incident. Ellie and one of her friends that joined the girls in the beach trip, Lila, returned to the beach one night to reflect on the traumatic events, only to find it deserted. While shark attacks are rare, Panama City Beach police reported sightings of several bull sharks near the sandbar where the first attack occurred. Bay County Sheriff Tommy Ford suggested that the presence of bait fish near the shore might have contributed to the attack, as sharks often follow schools of fish. Most shark bites on humans are believed to be cases of mistaken identity or curiosity. Sharks might mistake swimmers for prey or be startled by their presence. In Lulu's case, the precise cause of the attack remains unknown, but it highlights the importance of staying alert when entering shark territory. Lulu's story is one of survival, bravery, and hope. Despite the physical and emotional scars, she remains determined to pursue her dreams and live life to the fullest. Her attack will continue to haunt Seacrest Beach for some time, and it will surely put things into perspective for her family and friends. Still, it's ironic how a first-time beach trip turned into a living nightmare. But everyone's minds are filled with the same thought. You can never be too prepared to come face to face with one of the deadliest predators ever. In April 2023, 65-year-old Kevin Darmody was on a fishing trip with his friends, one of whom was visiting from New South Wales. He owned the Peninsula Hotel in Laura, Queensland, Australia, and was well known in the community. His nickname was Stumpy due to his small stature, but he was a tough man who loved the outdoors and especially loved fishing. On Saturday, April 29, 2023, Kevin and his friends headed to the remote and rugged Rangiru, or Lakefield National Park. Set amongst 500,000 hectares, the park is teeming with wildlife, least of all, crocodiles. Visitors can explore in four-wheel drives, on foot, or in boats. When the friends arrived along the Kennedy River, they split up, each finding the perfect spot along the riverbank to settle down and cast their rods in. Straight away, Kevin spotted a small crocodile, but shooed it away. He threw some stones at it in the water, and it sank beneath the surface, disappearing into the murky river. The river is well known to be teeming with barramundi, the kind of fish the men were after. As Kevin began fishing, enjoying the peace and quiet of the great outdoors, he was unaware that he was being watched by a much larger crocodile. Just below the surface, hidden by the shadows of the overhanging trees, was an enormous saltwater crocodile. Its eyes popped up silently through the surface of the water, its nostrils barely making a ripple. Many people refuse to fish along that stretch of the river. If you drive past at night and shine a light, you will certainly see the reflective eyes of several crocodiles lying in wait. Usually in Australia, where there are fish, there are crocodiles. Famed crocodile expert and conservationist, the late Steve Irwin, was well known for releasing problem crocodiles into the Kennedy River. The national park has been declared an area for crocodile conservation. They were protected there, and anglers knew the dangers of getting too close to the water. The largest resident croc was estimated to be about 4 meters, 13 feet long. Some regulars to the river predicted that the crocodile would attack someone one day. It was always bold. It could be seen stalking you, moving right up to the edge of the bank when it saw someone walking along it. Occasionally, there would be a splash in the water, and one of the ducks would disappear. The crocodiles were always on the lookout for a meal. As Kevin cast his lure into the water, he reeled it back slowly, repeating the process over and over. But then, as he was reeling the line back in, there was a tug. He struck the rod upwards, but realized that it wasn't a fish. Instead, his hook had caught on some underwater vegetation. He pulled the rod back, hoping to release the lure, but it was stuck fast. There are 2 scenarios that happened next. One suggests that Kevin was careless, a claim that his friends and family fiercely deny. The other suggests that Kevin slipped and fell into the water. Here, we describe both possibilities. Kevin could see where his taut fishing line fed into the water. It was just a few feet from the riverbank. Then when he reached the water's edge, he took a single step into the cool water of the river. All of a sudden, there was an explosion from the water, and a crocodile erupted outwards. Kevin let out a cry of alarm as he was seized in the crocodile's jaws. Less than a second later, he was dragged into the water. There was a swirl, and he was gone. Nobody saw a thing, but his friends heard his cry, followed by a large splash. They knew something had happened and raced to Kevin's fishing spot. His friend John Patey, who was visiting from New South Wales, took less than half a minute to get to the spot. When he arrived, there was no sign of Kevin. His fishing rod was gone. His hat had disappeared. It immediately became clear that Kevin had been taken by a crocodile, and they ran for help. No lure is worth risking your life for, but sitting on the riverbank fishing as he had done so for many years, Kevin had let his guard down. He had become complacent. A momentary lapse in concentration and common sense had cost Kevin his life. Or had it? Maybe that's not exactly what happened. Those who knew Kevin knew he wouldn't have been so careless. They said that Kevin was always warning people to be careful in croc country. Making a careless mistake like stepping into the water to retrieve a lure just didn't sound like Kevin. Kevin's friend John, who was the first to arrive at the scene, thought that Kevin had fallen into the water rather than entered to retrieve a lure. Beside Kevin's flip-flops was a large goanna. Before he heard the almighty splash and a cry for help, John thinks he heard Kevin shouting at something. Perhaps he was trying to shoo the goanna away and lost his footing and fell into the water, only to be taken by the crocodile seconds later. There was no sign of any water on the riverbank, suggesting that the crocodile or crocodiles had not leapt out of the water, as had first been assumed by experts. A search immediately began for Kevin, but there was no sign of him. For the first few moments under the water, he would have been fighting, trying to pry open the reptile's jaws. But saltwater crocodiles are thought to have the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, reaching pressures up to 3,700 psi, more than 5 times stronger than that of a lion. Kevin had little hope. Recently, another man was taken by a crocodile, but miraculously lived to tell the tale. When he was dragged down to the bottom of the river, he managed to gouge the crocodile's eyes, and it released him. But Kevin wasn't so lucky. The crocodile would have drowned him within minutes, taking him far below the river surface, where there was no hope of escape. As the hours passed, hopes for Kevin faded. There was now no doubt in his friends' minds that he had been taken by a crocodile. Wildlife officials were called in, and they scoured the river for any crocodiles nearby. Less than 1 mile upriver, they came across 2 crocodiles lying just below the surface. Suspecting that at least one of these 2 was responsible for Kevin's disappearance, the officers took aim and shot both of them within 10 seconds of each other. They hauled the bodies out of the water and cut them open on the riverbank, right then and there. They needed answers for Kevin's family and friends. Remarkably, inside both the crocodiles were human remains. They belonged to Kevin. One of the crocodiles was huge, measuring 4.1 meters, 13.5 feet. It was likely the well-known croc that had lived along that stretch of river for decades, observed cautiously by fellow anglers. Wildlife officers had caught the culprits, but it was difficult to say exactly what had happened. It would have been incredibly rare for both crocodiles to have struck Kevin at the same time, working together to bring him down. Equally, it would have been unusual for the larger crocodile to allow the smaller one to feast on its kill. Whatever happened, whether the 65-year-old deliberately stepped into the water or accidentally fell, Kevin was gone. The fishing trip had ended in tragedy, and there was proof that he had been snatched by not one, but two crocodiles. Every year in Australia, 1 or 2 people are killed by saltwater crocodiles. This is a very small number given the number of crocodiles in Australian waterways. Ever since a ban on hunting the prehistoric reptiles came into force in 1971, their numbers have exploded, but thankfully, human-crocodile conflicts are relatively rare. People know the dangers and stay away from the water's edge. In the small mountainous town of Downeyville, California, tucked into the Sierra Nevada mountains, people either live in cluster neighborhoods or far, far away from any neighbor at all in the heart of the mountains. Patricia Miller, a 71-year-old woman, had made this town her home for many decades. Downeyville has a population of around 290 people, so you can imagine everybody knows everybody, no matter how remote your house is. This is why, when Patricia's neighbors hadn't seen her in a while, they became suspicious. The woman would rarely leave her home, that's true, but she would never miss her weekly grocery run or her walk around the town square. So, in a welfare check requested by her neighbors, sheriff deputies made a horrifying discovery. The porch was stained with bear scat, and the mosquito screen was open, leading the way toward the unlocked front door. Patricia would often feed her cats on the porch, and there were a few piles of trash here and there, which might have attracted a bear. In fact, this wouldn't have been her first bear encounter on her property. Bears looked for food anywhere they could, and for them, Patricia's home was a gold mine. She had cat food scattered around the porch, fruit trees in her yard, and trash piles laying around where you least expected them. Yes, she wasn't the tidiest of women, but she really wasn't a fan of bears either. So a few years ago, when a bear wanted to enter her home, she fiercely punched it and chased it away. This time, however, Patricia didn't stand a chance against the beast. November temperatures can go as low as below freezing in the Sierra Nevada mountains, which can drive a lot of people inside rather than outside, despite the beautiful scenery. On a chill November night, Patricia was one of these people, relaxing at home next to the fire. Amidst the crackling of the firewood in her favorite TV show, the 71-year-old woman heard some kind of commotion right outside. She first thought it was a chatty neighbor, so she ignored the noise, wishing the person would go away. But the noise grew louder and louder and louder, until she couldn't lay in her armchair anymore. She got up and started to investigate. The porch was clear. There wasn't anything there that could make a sound, no matter how strong the wind was. So then she moved into the backyard, when it dawned on her that it might be the trash cans. Not a lot of time had passed since the last bear made its way onto her property to rummage for some food. And with the sudden low temperatures, any remaining bears roaming around the mountains would eventually come into the neighborhood to feed on whatever was available before entering hibernation. As Patricia reached the door that led to the backyard, she saw it. A big male black bear searching chaotically through her trash. Within a few seconds, her instinct kicked in. She simply couldn't let the bear get away with it. Patricia opened the back door and started hitting her pot and occasionally clapping her hands in order to scare the bear away. For some time, the beast wasn't at all bothered by the sounds, continuing to munch on old food found in the trash. But when Patricia found a rock and threw it at the animal, rage filled the bear's throat and it let out a frightening growl, one Patricia had never heard before. Suddenly, all her confidence and bravery left her thin old body. The bear started running toward the woman with incredible speed. Patrice ran back inside the house, closing the door just as the bear was about to grab her right shoulder. After a few seconds of staring at the bear's angry eyes, Patrice understood that she needed to barricade herself. She quickly walked toward the front door to make sure it was locked, but the bear had the same idea. Before she could reach the door, the bear tore open the mosquito screen and pushed through the front door. With a swift move, the bear lunged at the woman, pinning her to the floor on her stomach. Its sharp teeth tore into her left leg, revealing blood and flesh. She tried to move the bear off of her, but the reality of the situation hit her. She was still a 71-year-old woman, and that was still a huge black bear, probably weighing around 400 pounds. Her efforts were in vain. The bear's growls and huffs filled Patrice's body with terror. The animal had her still pinned down, mauling on her leg. Suddenly, the woman saw a spray can relatively close to her. She managed to reach it, and with every ounce of strength in her body, she aimed it at the bear's eyes and sprayed away. The beast got up, let out a deafening growl, and took a few steps back, confused and in pain. When it regained its balance, the beast's rage was even bigger than before. The black bear's claws reached Patrice just as she was about to get up. The bear grabbed the frail woman, raised her to the ceiling, and threw her on the floor before jumping on her body. Its claws dug into her torso, ripping apart almost every inch of her. Powerful teeth bit Patrice's arms while she lay there, hoping someone would hear her. Unfortunately, no one did. A few days after the attack, when her neighbors grew suspicious as no one had seen her in a while, sheriff deputies were dispatched to her home to do a welfare check. As they approached her secluded home, they were met with the unmistakable signs of a bear's presence: a broken door and fresh scat on the porch. Inside, the scene was grim. Miller's struggle for survival obviously lasted only a few moments before the bear's powerful bites and swipes caused fatal injuries. After the attack, the bear lingered around the property, feeding on the remains. Sheriff Mike Fisher, who spoke to the media, described the scene as one of chaos and violence. It appeared that the bear had probably been there for several days and had been feeding on the remains, he said, emphasizing the terrifying nature of the attack. Patrice's body was unrecognizable, with bites and claw marks all over her legs, torso, arms, and neck. When asked if anyone noticed the attack, her neighbors denied hearing anything out of the ordinary. No screams, no sounds of struggle, nothing. The deputy's initial theory was that the bear fed on the 71-year-old's body after she died. However, DNA testing and an autopsy revealed that Patrice died because of the bear attack. Authorities analyzed the bear's behavior and habits, noting that it had been feeding on Miller's property for days. The bear's boldness, as evidenced by its repeated visits, indicated that it had lost its fear of humans. Patrice Miller's last moments were filled with terror and struggle, but also with bravery. She tried to stand up against a beast, a massive black bear that invaded her home. Even though she didn't succeed, she would be remembered as a woman who knew how to stand up for herself and her community. Jahmari Reid was a quiet boy. He was somebody who was liked by his classmates and teachers. He was somebody who never got into any trouble. He lived in the Trelawney area in northwest Jamaica, the same area where sprinter Usain Bolt grew up, as well as many other Olympic athletes. Since he was a young boy, Jahmari enjoyed going spearfishing. He loved the thrill of the chase, diving down into the clear turquoise waters, pursing the fish, and then making the perfect shot. It was a rewarding hobby, pushing himself to greater limits, diving deeper, holding his breath for longer. He would then sell his catch at the local market before taking some back to his home for the family. But spearfishing didn't come without its dangers, and it was something that Jahmari and his father, Michael Reid, argued about. His father, who was a taxi driver, could see the dangers of spearfishing alone, the risk of currents, drowning, and of course sharks. Jahmari still did it. It was something he loved doing, and there was no way his father could stop him. On August 26, 2024, Jahmari headed down to the water near the Georgian town of Falmouth in North Jamaica. It was early in the morning, around 6 a.m. The rising sun was shimmering off the surface of the sea, creating a golden glow. It was a beautiful time of day. Other fishermen were setting off in their boats from the harbor. It was already a hive of activity, but the beach was quiet. As Jahmari entered the still water, he pulled his mask and snorkel over his face and then began swimming out to the reef. The water wasn't as clear as it often was. Recent high tides and rough weather had churned up the seabed. Bits of sand and sediment floated in front of Jahmari's face as he pushed his way through the water. On his hip was a mesh net in which he would put his catch, and in one hand was his spear gun. It wasn't the best spear gun on the island, but it worked and it had served him well. When he made it to the reef, he hovered above it, looking down at the marine life below him. It was a sight that never failed to make him smile. Just floating there, the sound of the busy town drowned out by the water in his ears, and nobody else but him alone in his own thoughts. Always made him happy. When he saw a decent-sized fish, he dived down towards it, following it before pulling the trigger on his gun. If it was a good shot, then the spear would pierce the fish and it would flap on the end of the line whilst Jahmari pulled it in. He then surfaced and placed the fish in his net before trying once more. The larger fish were always deepest. They had learnt to keep out of the way of people and to stay hidden, out of sight. But they were also worth more money, so the fishermen had to dive deeper to secure them. It could be frustrating when only the small fish would swim above the reef. In shark territory, the most dangerous part of the dive is resurfacing. Because spear fishermen resurface repeatedly, they are dicing with death each time they come up for breath. But Jamaica had only reported 3 unprovoked shark attacks since 1749. It almost had a clean record and was hardly like some of the more notorious places around the world like Florida, parts of Australia, or South Africa. It was considered a relatively safe place to swim, but that wasn't the case on this day. The record was about to change. The following is one possible scenario based on the evidence provided and knowledge of shark attacks. Jahmari bagged another fish and another, but the distress signals the fish gave off when speared and the small traces of blood that trickled from their puncture wounds were detected by a far greater fish, a tiger shark. It could sense there was prey ahead, injured prey. It had been swimming along the reef in search for food, and now it was enticed to the area where Jahmari was swimming. Oblivious to the danger he was now in, Jahmari continued to spearfish. But in the gloominess of the Caribbean Sea, he was now being hunted. Trying to stay as calm and exert as little energy as possible to stay under for longer, a dark shadow moved in from behind Jahmari. Then suddenly, and without warning, he was struck. It felt like an express train hitting him at 100 miles per hour. He couldn't make sense of it. There was no time to react or think about what was happening. He was thrown through the water. The air was knocked from his lungs, and he was dizzied and dazed. He kicked for the surface, desperate for a breath of air, but when he looked below him, he saw the terrifying sight of a shark. And it was coming back for more. Like an enormous barrel torpedoing up towards him, he held his hand out to push it away at the last second, but the shark grabbed his arm and ripped it from his shoulder. But the shark hadn't finished yet. It came back a third time. The shark crashed into him once more with its jaws opened wide. It clamped its serrated teeth around Jahmari's head. With a few violent shakes of its powerful muscular body, the 16-year-old's head came off in its jaws. Jahmari was likely dead before he knew what was happening to him. When he didn't return home that morning, his parents grew worried. His father was shocked that Jahmari had decided to go spearfishing alone. They had discussed the dangers many times. Down at the beach, there was no sign of their son, and they raised the alarm with locals and the police. A search party was organized. It wasn't until the following morning that fishermen heading out from Falmouth spotted something in the water. On board the boat was Jahmari's uncle, Robert Robinson. They steered the boat over to the thing floating in the water. In a moment of sheer horror, Jahmari's uncle noticed the thing floating in the water was Jahmari's head. Next to it was a hand, and then a short distance away was the rest of his body. It was a sight that will haunt Robert for the rest of his days. Just then, a huge tiger shark appeared near the body. It was clearly interested in the body, circling it closely. The fishermen shot at it, trying to keep it away until help arrived. Emergency services deployed divers to the scene. When the body was pulled aboard, it was a gruesome sight. Not only was the head missing, but so was the left arm. The jagged injuries were clearly made by a shark, and given the sighting of the tiger shark moments earlier, that was a likely culprit. Jahmari's parents were informed, and locals gathered at the beach to see the body come ashore. Everybody was in shock. Jahmari lived in a close-knit community. He was loved by so many and was remembered as somebody who just got on and did things. He didn't cause a fuss. He didn't make a noise. His mother remembered fondly how her son would sometimes just sit at the markets whilst waiting to sell his fish and watch the other fishermen playing dominoes. He was happiest when he was in and around the water, and fishing was the best way to achieve that. Jahmari will be missed by all who loved him. He died doing something he loved, even if his father disapproved. Diana Maria Cazacu was only 19 when she came face to face with a brown bear. Originally from Iași, Romania, she moved to Bucharest to live with her mother after her parents' divorce. A few weeks ago, in mid-June, Diana graduated from high school, and right at the beginning of July, she had to take the national final exam. She passed with flying colors as expected of her. Diana was a good student, and her entire family was proud of her. The next natural step was applying to college, but until then, she had a couple of weeks to relax a bit. Aside from her career goals, Diana had a lot of hobbies, including photography and hiking. She and her boyfriend took advantage of every opportunity to go and explore the serene Romanian mountains. One of her biggest goals was to reach Omu Peak, the highest point in the Bucegi Mountains and the sixth highest peak in Romania. Situated at 2,514 meters above sea level, the top of Omu Peak is rather flat, and it houses a cabin which many hikers use as a refuge, as well as a weather station. In fact, Omu Peak is the highest permanently populated spot in Romania. But Diana was still a beginner. Sure, she successfully finished a few easy hiking trails up until that point, but she wasn't an expert at all, and the trail to Omu Peak is quite dangerous, even for locals. On July 9th, early in the morning, Diana and her boyfriend took the train from Bucharest to Bușteni. They arrived at about 10 a.m., had some breakfast, and headed toward the trail's starting point. Around 10:45 a.m., Diana talked to her mom, their last conversation ever. Her mother's intuition was telling her something was off. She warned her daughter to come back home, but the 19-year-old wouldn't change her mind. "You've kept me sheltered all this time. Now it's time for me to experience amazing things," she told her mother. But her mother had a very good reason to be worried about Diana. One time when she was hiking with a friend, another bear chased her. Nothing could have stopped her. She felt like she had to prove herself somehow, and reaching that peak was the only way. Every summer, the brown bear population descends into the villages and towns nestled at the base of the mountains in search of food. This has become a huge problem in recent years because of tourists' fascination with these animals. People often stop their cars in the middle of the road to feed bears and take pictures with them. Having food condition these animals, it wasn't a surprise that a bear walked the same trail as Diana that fateful day. Driven by its instincts and incredible hunger, the beast saw in Diana its next delicious meal. The couple started their ascent and made their way through Valea Jupilor. The steep, narrow path was a true challenge, but the scenery was so beautiful that it was worth it. To the right was the way to Foamy Valley Waterfall. and to their left was Howling Waterfall. Here is where things get blurry. A witness's account, who actually was at Foamy Valley Waterfall that day, seems to point out that Diana and her boyfriend headed towards Foamy Valley, but were still quite far from the waterfall, while some media outlets say they headed toward Howling Waterfall. Like this case, Kahraman is also clouded in mystery. Every year, hikers go missing or fall to their deaths on this trail, which prompted the locals to believe in a legend. They say that during the summer, a mysterious off-the-maps trail shows up out of nowhere, surrounded by dense fog, and whoever chooses to hike it either dies in mysterious ways or comes back dizzy, confused, and deeply injured. It's not clear whether Diana saw this path or not, but the series of events that unfolded next seems to point out that she was separated from her boyfriend, alone, face to face with a brown bear. As she was walking on the steep rocky path, the 19-year-old noticed something moving a few meters in front of her. Unsure of what to do, she stopped and tried to stand as still as possible. She looked over her shoulder for her boyfriend, but he was way behind her. Listening to her instincts, she called 112, the equivalent to 911 in Romania, to announce the possible presence of a bear. This was happening around 1:30 to 2 p.m. On another trail near Foamy Valley, the only witness to this case beside Diana's boyfriend was also calling 112 to announce a bear's presence. The 112 operator quickly answered, and Diana described where she was and what she saw. The operator gave her some tips on how to act if the bear came nearer. Not having any bear spray or something to make noise with and scare the bear away, Diana had to resort to stomping, speaking loudly, and making herself look bigger. A few moments later, the bear looked directly at her. Diana let out a scream while still on the phone with the 112 operator. "He's coming closer. The bear is running toward me," she yelled. The operator reminded her to make noise and scare the bear, but Diana was too terrified to think. Her boyfriend told the authorities he also tried to scare the bear or misdirect his attention, but the witness said she could only hear Diana's voice. It's possible that her boyfriend got scared and ran away, leaving her all alone to face the hungry 300-kilogram beast. It's also possible he simply froze from fear and panic while watching his girlfriend die. With astounding speed, the bear ran toward Diana, ready to attack her. Diana screamed, her voice echoing in the forest, and in a desperate judgment error, she decided to run, a grave mistake. The bear lunged at the girl and grabbed her legs with its sharp claws, throwing her to the ground. Still screaming and on the phone with the operator, Diana fought bravely, trying to get out of the bear's grasp. Unfortunately, she didn't stand a chance. The bear dragged Diana toward a ledge while still clawing her, ripping her clothes and leaving behind bloody, deep scratches. Her screams, which up until then filled the forest, stopped abruptly. Almost 2 hours after the attack, rescuers finally descended to retrieve Diana's body. The snarling bear was still circling her and going back from time to time to feast some more. When the animal saw the rescuers, it became agitated and aggressive. Fearing for their lives as well, they shot it dead. When describing what they saw, the rescuers told the media outlets that Diana's injuries were impossible to survive. She probably died from the fall, but the bear feasted on her until they arrived 2 hours later, so you can imagine how horrifying she must have looked. President of Salvamont, Romania, the country's mountain rescue services, Sabine Cornorio, believed the bear must have been suffering from rabies, and that was the reason it attacked Diana, while others believe she lost her balance and fell into the abyss, and the bear simply followed her down. There's still a lot of confusion surrounding Diana's death, but one thing is for sure. Never walk into bear territory unprepared. Always carry bear spray with you, just in case. Also remember, if a black bear charges at you, fight back. But if a brown bear attacks you, play dead. "40-year-old Dr. David Hogbin and his wife of 10 years, Jane, were both GPs living in Newcastle in New South Wales, Australia. They had 3 sons, aged 7, 5, and 2. In August 2024, the young family were on a four-wheel drive camping holiday with some of Jane's family. They had taken their vehicle along the Queensland coast. The trip was full of adventure, settling down under night skies full of stars, cooking in the open bush, stopping off for dips and water holes, and admiring the beautiful scenery along the way. They had even made it to and posed for a photo together at Cape York, the northernmost point of the Australian continent. It was the kind of adventure that David loved, being in the great outdoors with his loving family. But their trip was about to come to a tragic and life-changing end. Along one of their many walks, the young family followed a well-trodden footpath along the Annan River, just outside Cooktown. It was Saturday, August 3, 2024. David and Jane were acutely aware of the dangers that lie in Australian rivers. They never strayed too close to the water's edge and always kept their children at a safe distance. David was fiercely protective of his family. The established path they were following ran alongside the river around 5 meters or 16 feet above the waterline. This was out of reach of any potential danger that could be lurking in the murky water below. It was a glorious day, but there had been recent heavy rains which had weakened the riverbank and the path that David and his family were now walking along. Although most Australian rivers are considered dangerous due to the potential threat of crocodiles, this stretch of river wasn't the ideal hunting ground for the prehistoric reptiles. The bank was too high for the likes of wallabies to wander down to the river for a drink, and crocodiles wouldn't be able to leap high enough out of the water to take anything walking along the footpath. But unbeknownst to David and his family, people had regularly thrown fish scraps into the river, watching in delight as the crocodiles emerged, swirling in the water before disappearing from sight. The crocodiles had now learned that this section of the river would provide them with an easy meal. They had also learned to associate people with food. The path David had been walking on suddenly gave way. The riverbank had caved in beneath his feet. He was sent sliding down the riverbank, scraping himself as he slid over the rough terrain, and in a matter of seconds, he landed in the river. The cold water took his breath away, and he immediately scrambled to get himself out. In the desperate seconds that followed, Jane rushed forward along the footpath, pushing past her children and the other family members. She slid down the bank to her husband and immediately reached out. But just yards away, the splash had been noticed by something else. A 5-meter, 16-foot crocodile slowly swam toward the commotion. David and Jane hadn't seen it, but they knew that David was in serious danger, and they needed to get him out of the water quickly. Just a second later, the crocodile launched its attack, and David felt the crushing sensation of its powerful jaws around his wrist. In a split second, the father of 3 made the heroic decision to let go of his wife's arm. She was his only lifeline in those horrifying moments, but he knew that she would be pulled into the water if he didn't let go. He couldn't bear the thought of his 3 young boys growing up without parents. As he let go, the crocodile dragged him underwater. Jane screamed and watched in horror as David disappeared into the murky green-brown water. With the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, there was no way David was getting out of its vice-like grip without some kind of miracle. He would have tried to fight back, trying to reach for the crocodile's vulnerabilities, like its eyes and tip of its snout. But fighting for breath at the same time, disoriented and in shock, his fight would have been short-lived. There was a swirl, a slight splash for the enormous animal's tail, and then all was still. It was as if nothing had happened. There was no continued struggle. There was no commotion, no reappearance of Jane's husband. In an instant, David was gone, and Jane had to climb back up the bank to explain what had happened to her 7, 5, and 2-year-old sons. In an instant, their lives had changed forever. Emergency services were scrambled to the Annan River Bridge just after 2 p.m. that afternoon. But there was nothing they could do. David was gone. A search ensued, looking for any trace of the much-loved family man. News spread of David's final selfless act to save his wife. It was an act that resonated with his family and friends. It was the kind of man he was, a genuinely kind-hearted soul who touched so many lives. What followed was an agonizing 2 days while the search for the crocodile and David continued. along that stretch of river. The family was in shock and they were in mourning. The incredible family holiday that they had been planning for months before had ended in the worst way imaginable. A huge crocodile was found on a Monday evening 2 days after David was taken. It was found in a creek 2.5 miles from where David had been taken and was killed. Human remains were found inside. It appeared that the authorities had caught the animal responsible for David's death, but DNA analysis would have to confirm it. Within 2 days of a GoFundMe page being set up, more than $110,000 had been raised, a testament to how well-liked David was. Following the tragedy, rumors spread about the attack. People believed that David was fishing too close to the riverbank when he was taken. His wife Jane spoke out about what happened to clear up the misinformation that was being spread and to warn others about the dangerous stretch of river. But most of all, she wanted people to know about David. Someone didn't just get killed by a crocodile, Jane said. We have lost a wonderful husband, father, son, brother, friend, and doctor. She reiterated the fact that David and the family weren't doing anything wrong. He was just walking around a corner on a well-worn path. It was just one of those random accidents that happened, and nothing could have been done to prevent. One tiny consolation for Jane was the fact that whilst their young boys were close, they didn't actually see the attack. And if she had been pulled into the water as well, then the whole situation could have been 1,000,000 times worse for the boys and the rest of the family. Jane's family and friends have spoken about how incredibly kind David was, and in his final few years, he had been the happiest he had ever been in his entire life. He always jokingly offered to be a stay-at-home dad and never work again because his children were his #1 priority. His boys will grow up remembering their father and all the adventures they went on in the short time they had together. They will grow up knowing that their father was a hero, and only moments before he died, he couldn't have been happier. He was loving and loyal right to the very end. "240 miles northeast of Sydney lies North Shore Beach in Port Macquarie. It's a long sandy beach popular with campers and surfers. But on July 23, 2024, the unthinkable happened. 23-year-old Kai McKenzie had recently recovered from a neck injury. He was a sponsored free surfer, being paid to enjoy his hobby. It was a dream come true. He had only returned to surfing 6 months before, having fractured his neck, according to his sponsors, Rage and Worship, an Australian surf hardware company. But something was about to go horribly, horribly wrong. Something far worse than his fractured neck. Hitting the waves that morning just before 11 a.m., the day appeared to be just like any other, except for one thing. Unbeknownst to Kai and the other beachgoers, there was a 10-foot great white shark on the prowl beneath the waves. It could see the dark shadows of the surfers above it, their silhouettes against the sun. All of a sudden, it launched its attack. With its eyes fixed firmly on Kai, it powered upward and toward the surfer. In a desperate attempt to get himself out of harm's way, Kai paddled furiously toward the shore. With millions of years of killer instinct built into it, the shark was designed to take down even the most athletic of prey. The young surfer was no match for the great white. It opened its powerful jaws, and Kai knew what was coming. A devastating concoction of power, speed, and agility. A millisecond later, it bit into Kai's leg. Its bite force up to 4,000 psi. Its serrated teeth like razor blades slicing through skin, muscle, and bone, as well as the back of Kai's surfboard. Kai felt the full force of the attack and was instantly pulled off his board. He tried to hold on, his knuckles white as he gripped the front of his board, but the force at which he was hit ripped him away immediately. He took in a deep gulp of air as he was dragged underwater. But Kai was a fighter. He didn't give up easily. The attack was caught on camera, a shocking video of the turmoil Kai was in. People on the beach watched, stunned, shocked, and sickened by what they saw. But what could they do? A young man was fighting for his life. He grappled with the animal, kicking his legs furiously, punching and clawing at its sandpaper-like skin. The shark thrashed around in the water, Kai's leg held firmly in its jaws. He reappeared momentarily, gasping and splashing around, trying to climb back on his board, but the shark wasn't letting go. As Kai was dragged underwater once more, he thought that this could be the end. This could be it. Every surfer's worst nightmare had come true, but the pressure on his leg continued to grow. Rather than the agonizing pain one would expect during such an attack, it was more like his leg was held in a vice that was gripping him tighter and tighter. It was squeezing his leg with such force that Kai felt like it was going to give way at any moment. Then suddenly, Kai was released. He bobbed back up to the surface. The sun was on his face, and he scrambled about in the frothing, foaming sea, shaking water from his eyes, looking all around him. He didn't know it right away, but the shark hadn't let go. Instead, it had severed through his leg. It had torn the limb right off above the knee, allowing Kai to get to the surface. Urged on by the power of adrenaline, Kai grabbed his broken board. At that second, he felt the water build behind him and miraculously caught a wave toward the shore. It was perhaps the luckiest wave of his life, as the shark was still there, right underneath him, ready to take another bite. Luckily, the wave propelled Kai towards safety, but he was leaving a blood trail. Every second counted. Every second he was inching closer to the safety of the beach, but what lay beneath him was terrifying. He didn't know if he would be attacked again. The shark was likely circling him below the surface, waiting for its prey to weaken before coming in to finish it off, a typical behavior in great white sharks. Each second that passed felt like minutes, and the shoreline couldn't come quick enough. Incredibly, with sheer determination, Kai made it to the beach. Those who had witnessed the terrible incident rushed to his aid, dragging him from the knee-high surf. They laid Kai down on the sand, working quickly to stop the bleeding. All the while, Kai remained remarkably calm. Whether it was shock, disbelief, or him actively focused on keeping his heart rate down, and therefore blood loss to a minimum, it worked. Kai remained cautious throughout and was able to speak to the people who surrounded him. The strangers helping out all spoke to him, keeping him awake, reassuring him, and applying pressure to his gaping wound. Within minutes, the emergency services arrived. An ambulance and a rescue helicopter were scrambled to the location. Now, it was just a race against time to get Kai to the hospital before he bled out. He was rushed to John Hunter Hospital in Newcastle, New South Wales, 150 miles to the south. Upon arrival, Kai was hurried into surgery, where surgeons fought to save his life. The quick actions of the retired police officer and the bravery displayed by Kai in fighting off the shark may have saved his life. While Kai was in critical condition in the hospital, with his friends and family not knowing whether he was going to make it, his leg washed up on shore. It was like something out of a horror film, but quick-thinking locals picked up the leg and put it on ice before rushing it to the hospital. It was hoped that it could be reattached. Following the attack, authorities closed the beaches between North Shore and Lighthouse Beach for 24 hours. A drone was deployed to search for the shark, and 2 smart drum lines were set in addition to the 4 that were already there. Kai's surfboard was left with a sizable chunk carved out of it from the shark's bite. Although Kai was the only person to see the shark, experts examined the bite mark on his board, listened to the description of the attack, and concluded that it was a great white. Fatal shark attacks are relatively rare, with Australia losing 4 people to them in 2023. Australia typically receives the second highest number of shark attacks every year, after the US. But that still doesn't stop people from enjoying their time at the beach and in the sea. A GoFundMe page was set up to raise funds for Kai's medical care. It quickly raised almost 190,000 Australian dollars, a testament to the people who were touched by his incredible story. A week after his ordeal, Kai was sitting up in his hospital bed. He posted a photo of himself on his social media, surrounded by friends and family. "Spot something missing" was the caption. His severed leg could not be reattached. But that didn't deter Kai. He was determined to get back out on his board as soon as he was able. He wasn't going to let a great white stand in his way of having fun. A 35-year-old disabled Army Reserve veteran found a unique hobby in his spare time that he could enjoy with his wife, photographing owls. In May 2024, he received a tip from a friend that the elusive great gray owl could be found in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. Intrigued by this news, he convinced his wife to make a journey out of it and try to capture the magnificent animal on his camera. Little did he know that this rather peaceful endeavor would turn into a life or death situation, far worse than anything he had experienced back in his Army days. On May 19th, Shayne and his wife Chloe set out together toward the national park in search of the owl. On the way there, they decided it was best for Chloe to remain in the parking lot to wait for him. He would be gone for only an hour, so it wasn't necessary for her to come too. As soon as they arrived at the starting point of the hike, they said, "See you later," and Shayne went on his merry way with his backpack on his back, camera strapped around his neck, and a bear spray in his pocket just in case. The hike was quite uneventful, unfortunately. He didn't seem to spot the great gray owl anywhere. During all of these, he seemed to have lost track of time, and Chloe, back at the car, turned impatient and worried. After more than an hour and a half of hiking through the thick forest, he remembered the promise he had made earlier to his wife. He knew she must be worried by then, so he tried to call her to say he was on his way back. With poor service deep in the wooded area, he only managed to open his GPS, which showed only his current location and the parking lot point. He knew that if he wanted to return as quickly as possible to Chloe, he needed to go off the hiking trail and beeline to the car. Not wasting a moment, he started his journey through a thick wooded valley. A few steps into his off-trail impromptu hike, he started to feel like something was off. This increasing sense of unease alerted him to put into practice everything he had learned about recommended bear safety precautions. So, looking like a madman, he began to make noise by breaking branches, stepping on fallen leaves, singing, shouting, and even talking loudly to himself in the hope of avoiding an unwanted encounter with wildlife. But after a few more minutes, his efforts would prove to be in vain. The unexpected occurred. As the 35-year-old man made his way through the valley, something at the corner of his eye. Through the dense foliage, he spotted a grizzly bear cub, just shy of 70 yards away from him. Burke immediately knew that should the mother bear see him, only a miracle could save him. The Army veteran, driven by intuition, placed his hand in the pocket where he knew he would find the bear spray can that he brought with him. The next moment, a loud thud, followed by a ferocious roar, made him look toward a big bush to his left. Behind it, the mother bear was charging at him with astonishing speed. Burke tried to shout. One of the first things that are recommended to do when meeting a bear is make loud noises, but the grizzly paid him absolutely no attention. Fearless, the mother bear closed the distance between them. The 35-year-old had no way to go. He quickly assessed the situation. In front of him, there was a mad bear ready to attack. At his right and left were miles upon miles of foliage and rocks that he could very well stumble upon. And behind him, there was a valley that he could maybe roll off of. In absolutely any situation, the bear could run after him, catch him, and then eat him alive. And he didn't even manage to take that picture of the great gray owl. What a waste, he thought. As soon as the bear moved toward him again, in a split-second decision, he turned his back to the bear, dropped to his stomach, and locked his hands behind his neck. He had read about this hack on one of those surviving grizzly attacks forums. In the hopes that the sound would scare off the bear, he screamed as loud as he could. Unfortunately, it only seemed to infuriate her even more instead. The bear stepped on his back, its immense weight pressing him into the ground. She bit into one of his legs, lifting him off the ground and slamming him back down multiple times. Burke felt the teeth of the bear pierce his skin, ripping through muscle. The bear persisted in her attack, biting his legs roughly 3 times total, from his inner knees to his buttocks. Burke let out another scream, one that briefly diverted the bear's attention and made her focus on his head. In a horrifying realization, Burke knew the bear might be going in for a kill bite on his neck. Throughout the attack, Burke had managed to keep a grip on his bear spray can, holding it behind his neck where his hands were interlocked. As the bear bit at his hands, her teeth also sank into the canister, causing it to explode in her mouth. The sudden burst of bear spray startled her, causing her to retreat. Burke heard her running up the hill toward her cub, giving him a moment to gather himself. He was safe from the bear's claws, but he had a long journey ahead of him back to the parking lot, now with life-threatening injuries. In a moment of respite, Burke tried to call his wife, but the thick forest had won again. Despite the lack of service, he managed to send a text that finally went through to her. It read, "Attacked." Bleeding profusely and barely being able to walk, Shayne knew he had to act fast. The clock was ticking, and the bear could always come back for round 2. He dragged his injured legs as far and as quickly as he could to put more distance between himself and the grizzly, but he soon grew tired and had to stop. Finally, his call reached Chloe. She answered with a panicked voice and slowly guided him in taking care of his injuries until emergency services could get to him. Shayne knew that administering first aid would be crucial in this type of situation. With his back against a tree, he emptied his backpack and found a fanny pack and another camera strap he could fashion into a makeshift tourniquet. He managed to slow the bleeding on his most injured leg, realizing the bear had just missed an artery. Clutching a knife in his right hand in case the bear returned, he awaited rescue. During this time, thinking only of the severity of his injuries, he recorded a video message for his loved ones in case he wouldn't survive. Luckily, help was on the way. After determining Burke's location through triangulation, the Grand Teton National Park Rangers and Teton County search and rescue personnel were sent to the scene by the 911 operator. They provided emergency medical care before airlifting him to an awaiting ambulance. Burke was transported to St. John's Hospital, where he underwent surgery to clean and staple his wounds, and fortunately, he survived. Shayne Burke's survival wouldn't have been possible without his quick thinking and intuition, but most importantly, his knowledge of bear behavior and the use of bear spray. These factors, along with his ability to remain calm during that, might disqualify this case as a miracle. It wasn't a miracle, it was his survival instinct kicking in at the right time. What began as a small petting zoo in the 1940s became one of the most popular tourist attractions in Israel. It's now a thriving zoo housing more than 2,000 animals and is renowned for its successful breeding of endangered and locally extinct species. With such a prestigious reputation, the zoo employs the most dedicated staff. They are highly skilled, highly trained, and completely devoted to the welfare of the animals. But on Sunday, August 18, 2024, the unthinkable happened. One of the most experienced zookeepers in the zoo was performing routine maintenance inside one of the enclosures. But this wasn't just any enclosure, this was the crocodile enclosure. The man has not yet been named, but we shall call him Yosef for the purposes of this video. Yosef was 45 years old and had devoted his entire adult life to the conservation of wildlife. He had followed his passion for animals that he had developed as a young boy and had worked as a zookeeper for 20 years. Working in Jerusalem Biblical Zoo was a dream job. He was surrounded by the animals he had been fascinated by since childhood, and his work was rewarded when he was given more responsibilities by the zoo managers and senior staff. Before the zoo opened, the staff began their duties. Enclosures needed cleaning, animals needed feeding, and food outlets needed stocking for the paying public. Yosef made his way to the crocodile enclosure. Tall metal fences surrounded a dried-out concrete hollow where crocodiles could swim when it was full of water. Green grass sprouted sparsely from the dusty brown perimeter that ran along the fence line. Visitors could view the crocodiles through large glass windows, watching as staff threw scraps of meat from wooden platforms that protruded into the enclosure. The feeding of the crocodiles always wowed the audience as they watched the reptile's impressive jaws snap closed with lightning-fast speed. That morning, Yosef stepped into the enclosure. The crocodiles were at the far end, nowhere near the experienced keeper. Yosef was tasked with mending a small section of the enclosure. Keeping his eyes on the animals at all times, Yosef knelt down to repair a small hole in the fencing. Work like this was routine, and he had performed it multiple times before. Rule number 1 was never take your eyes off the animals while inside their domain. But something happened that morning, something that distracted Yosef, and he broke the cardinal rule. He took his eyes off the crocodiles. Whatever it was, Yosef glanced away from the dried-up pond, letting his guard down in the most dangerous of locations. It only took a second, but it was a second that would change his life forever. He didn't notice one of the animals approaching him. It scuttled out of the dried-up concrete pond, silently and swiftly, rushing toward the unsuspecting keeper. Its head swayed from side to side as its short legs carried it across the ground. When Yosef lifted his head, it was too late. The crocodile lunged at him. It brought its jaws crashing down on Yosef's upper body. With a bite force of around 4,000 psi compared to our own of around 200 psi, the damage was incredible. Considered to have the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, it's impossible to pry open a fully grown crocodile's jaws. But Yosef wasn't giving up that easily. He fought back, screaming and shouting for help as he did so. He tried to poke the animal in its eyes or bash it on the snout, but the attack was so ferocious, so rapid and dramatic that it was hard to comprehend what was going on. All Yosef could see was a whirlwind of green-brown scales, sharp white teeth, and thick, knobbly skin. It felt like an eternity, and no one came. He was all alone with one of the world's most lethal predators. But Yosef's colleagues had heard the commotion and ran to see what was going on. The scene they arrived at was one of horror. Their friend was underneath one of the crocodiles, wrestling for his life. With no way to stop the attack themselves, they immediately radioed through to the security guard. He jumped onto his motorcycle and raced to the crocodile enclosure. Tearing through the park, swerving along the walkways, he raced to the scene. Leaping off the bike, ripped his gun from his holster and raised it in front of him. Without hesitating, he took aim and fired at the crocodile. He had to be sure of his shot, a foot or two in either direction, and he could have easily shot Yosef. The crocodile reeled in pain as the bullets hit it. It immediately let go of its meal and scuttled away from him. The crack from the gun rang out across the zoo, alerting others that something was going on. Police were called and raced to the zoo entrance. Unclear messages about shots being fired in a possible crocodile attack came through from the station, but officers weren't sure what they would find when they arrived. Inside the enclosure, Yosef lay motionless on the dry, dusty ground. Blood pooled around his body. 2 of the crocodiles had been shot and recoiled a short distance away. Cautiously, emergency services and zoo staff made their way into the enclosure. Yosef, he was in a very bad way and barely breathing, but he was still alive. They lifted him out and into a waiting ambulance. He was rushed to the trauma unit at Hadassah Ein Kerem, just 10 minutes away, and straight into surgery. He was in a mess. The crocodile had bitten him repeatedly. With every snap of its jaws, the teeth had sliced through skin, muscle, and down to the bone. The crocodile had mostly devastated Yosef's upper body and face. In surgery, a team of anesthetists, oral and maxillofacial specialists, orthopedic and plastic surgeons worked on the 45-year-old for 9 hours. At the time of making this video, Yosef remained in critical condition, heavily sedated, ventilated, and in intensive care. His family and friends can only hope and pray for his full recovery. With Yosef out of the enclosure, the zoo's staff turned their attention to the crocodiles. The crocodile that had attacked Yosef had been struck multiple times by bullets. At first, it seemed like the damage to the enormous beast was minimal, but that night, its injuries became apparent. Despite the best efforts of Dr. Nili Evan-Megan, the veterinary director at the zoo, and the rest of the vet team. The crocodile died from its wounds. A second crocodile was injured by bullets, but is expected to make a full recovery. The whole shocking incident thankfully took place before the zoo opened to the public. Had paying guests been visiting at the time, the situation could have been worse. Not only was Yosef lucky that he had not been dragged into water, but it was lucky that the other crocodiles in the enclosure didn't join in the attack, leading to a feeding frenzy that would have almost certainly killed Yosef instantly. Tamayo Perry was a beloved surfer, lifeguard, and occasional actor. Everyone knew him for his infectious personality, amazing surfing skills, and dedication to the ocean. Born in 1975 in a small country town just east of the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii, Tamayo Perry developed an early love for the ocean. His deep connection with the ocean and its waves led him to pursue a career in professional surfing. Perry was well known for his ability to surf some of the most dangerous waves in the world, especially the infamous pipeline on Oahu's north shore. The pipeline, often referred to as the world's deadliest wave, was where Perry honed his skills and built his reputation as a fearless and talented surfer. The Bonsai Pipeline is a renowned surf reef break situated in Hawaii off Ehukai Beach Park in Pupukea on the north shore of Oahu. Pipeline is famous for its massive waves that break in shallow water just above a sharp and cavernous reef, creating large, hollow, and thick curls of water, ideal for surfers to tube ride. Pipeline features 3 reefs, each located progressively farther out to sea in deeper water, which become active as the size of the approaching ocean swells increase. Tamayo's 1999 victory at the Pipeline Masters Trials secured him a spot in the main event, where he upset the #1 world title contender, showcasing his skills in some of the biggest and rawest wave conditions in the history of the competition. Proving that a small-town island boy could compete with the world's best, he soon received an invitation to the Tahiti Trials, introducing him to the world's second most infamous wave, Teahupo. The conditions were extreme, demanding 110% focus, commitment, and respect. As a devoted waterman, he gained tremendous knowledge not only from his accomplishments, but also from his suffering. Several years ago, while surfing an extra-large pipeline, he was involved in a freak accident that turned into a near-fatal experience due to someone else's lack of awareness. Perry was struck by a wayward board embedded in a tumbling wave. The accident required 100 stitches to his head. The lessons learned from that event inspired him to instill proper surf etiquette and safety in those he taught. Tamayo Perry pursued acting in addition to his surfing career, landing parts in a number of well-known movies and TV shows. Known for his surfing prowess, Perry made his big-screen debut in the 2002 movie Blue Crush. He also made cameos in well-known TV shows like Lost and Hawaii Five-0. However, he played one of the Buccaneers alongside Johnny Depp, Penelope Cruz, and Geoffrey Rush in the 2011 blockbuster Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, which was his most well-known role. In July 2016, he started working for the City and County of Honolulu Ocean Safety, and he soon established himself as a valuable team member. Because of his vast experience and deep knowledge of the ocean, Perry was an excellent lifeguard, especially on Oahu's treacherous north shore. Kurt Lager, the acting chief of Honolulu Ocean Safety, praised Perry for his infectious personality and unwavering dedication. Tamayo's personality was infectious, and as much as people loved him, he loved everyone else more, Lager said. His decades of surfing experience and growing up on Oahu made him aware of the presence of sharks. He developed a sort of sixth sense. In a June 2019 Facebook post, Perry admitted, "Can people smell sharks around? I don't know if it's my imagination, but I swear I can smell when they're around." Tamayo's ability to sense sharks around him became a unique aspect of his connection to the ocean. Friends and fellow surfers often noted Perry's heightened awareness whenever he was in the water. Despite this extraordinary sense, the ocean's unpredictability posed a constant threat to Tamayo. After 2 sharks attacked Mick Fanning back in 2015, Tamayo wrote in a Facebook post that sharks freaked him out. He also eerily mentioned that only the Lord can say when it's your time. And he was sadly right about that. On June 23, 2024, an ordinary Sunday afternoon turned tragic when the 49-year-old surfer was attacked by a shark while surfing near Goat Island, just off Oahu's north shore. Perry would often swim and surf in that very spot. That day, he was taking a well-deserved break from his job as a lifeguard, and he decided it would be a great idea to catch some waves. Goat Island has waves almost all year round due to the steady trade swells and north-northwest wraps. However, the winds are almost always unfavorable. In the summer, it's pretty popular because it's one of the few places on the east side that has anything to ride. It's also worth mentioning that Goat Island also lies adjacent to a river that sometimes deposits dead animals and other things into the area that attracts sharks. A legend wraps the area in mystery. It's believed that Laya Bay is the legendary home of a shark god who goes in the form of a more than 30-foot-long tiger shark. Legend or not, one thing is for sure. Sharks can definitely hide here beneath the crystal blue waves, posing a serious danger for unsuspecting swimmers and surfers. On that fateful day, Tamayo's sixth sense couldn't help it. At approximately 1 p.m., a distress call was made, reporting a surfer who had suffered severe shark bites and was struggling in the water. The alarm was raised, and emergency services, including Honolulu Ocean Safety, rushed to the scene. It's still unclear how the attack happened. What we do know for sure is that Tamayo was pretty much alone in the water. The shark caught Tamayo off guard, despite his vast experience and his alleged shark radar. The two other people who were in the ocean at the time paddled towards him as soon as they noticed the 49-year-old struggling. The scene was horrifying. They could only see a mix of water, foam, and blood. But from Tamayo's screams for help, it was clear to them it was a shark attack. From time to time, Tamayo's body resurfaced before it got dragged underwater again by the relentless shark. The pain must have been unimaginable. When the water calmed down, the ocean revealed Tamayo's mauled body as silence fell over the beach. He was missing a leg and an arm, and he wasn't moving at all. The two people, along with the lifeguards, quickly reached the floating body of the famous surfer. They immobilized him and brought Perry to shore via jet ski. Paramedics were on standby, but despite their immediate assistance, Perry was pronounced dead at the scene. The type of shark involved in the attack is currently unidentified. However, given the extent of Tamayo's injuries, it's believed that a tiger shark might have had something to do with the attack, as tiger sharks are present in that area. The tiger shark can weigh up to 2,000 pounds and has a reputation for eating almost anything. From time to time, these sharks decide to attack humans, making them one of the most dangerous shark species. Professor Kim Holland from the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology highlighted the enigmatic nature of shark attacks. We don't really know why. Every once in a great while, sharks decide to bite something. It's a mystery. Unfortunately, Tamayo's journey was cut short too soon. A true legend who died doing what he loved.